My name is David Parry and I'm a vicar of 2 parishes in South Liverpool. I also have the job for the Diocese of Director of Ordinance, which means I have oversight of those people who are beginning to test a calling towards ordination, right the way from their first inquiry through to them being ordained as deacons. I remember working in a psychiatric hospital as an atheist, and one of the patients there said to me, "I think you should be a priest," which at the time I thought was hilarious and perhaps a sign of his illness. But I think he saw something in me that I hadn't fully seen myself, and that question stayed with me for many years. So from the point of coming to faith, perhaps even before that point, God already has a path for our lives, and ordination is just one possible way that that may actually be expressed. But I think for many people, they've known for a long time that God is actually asking something of them which is about more than just their personal Christian journey, but is about the public work of the church, the kingdom of God. In fact, I remember my wife coming back from an ordination that she'd been to, and I said to her, "Well, what did they look like, these people who are being ordained?" And she said to me, "Well, they look like every kind of person you can think of." And that's been my experience since. Not just because we serve a God who is creative and makes an immensely diverse world and wants to call people from every part of it, but also because if we're really being true to God's call, it's local, it's incarnational, it's in every part of the world. And we need people that can relate to every kind of situation and culture. Many of our parishes contain people who don't see themselves naturally as leaders or as people that God could call. They often have had many negative messages in their lives. And whether that's the sort of person you are or whether you're someone who's had a very confident background, it's important to recognise that God can call you and use the unique person you are for the new unique work He wants you to do. About the only place we're not called to is to stay in our comfort zone. And the stories you're about to hear, a whole range of backgrounds and ministries, illustrate that point.
Prayer is a conversation with God, often very one way. Sometimes we don't let God get a word in edgeways. But the callings that I've received in my life have actually been at the result of prayer. And yes, 1 minute not realising and then the next minute realising that God was calling me, rattling my cage. My name's Kath Rogers. I am a curate, non-stipendiate, Holy Trinity Formby, and I'm a diocesan resources officer. I grew in my faith and made the decision to explore changing from a career in the NHS. Alongside me there's Anne, who's a physiotherapist. There's also Martin, who works as a chaplain, and there's David, who works in the university. And we try and exercise our priesthood through that employment. For some people, the term calling doesn't really mean anything. They don't understand that, and it is difficult to explain. There's one person that I'm very close friends with who doesn't believe there's God, but is actually very angry at this God that they don't believe in. And we quite often have conversations where he just doesn't get it, but he likes me and he knows I pray for him and a member of his family that's very ill. It's not very comfortable having your cage rattled. And at first the response was, "I'm not good enough to do that, and I'm used to being an NHS employee, I'm used to doing this. Why on earth would you want me to change?" And the stories of Isaiah and Jeremiah and Moses in the Old Testament and even Jonah are very relevant, because they all, put up their hands in horror and said, "No, Lord." Most of us are very ordinary, very frail. And many of us are very penitent because we actually know our frailties. If you think that you're not good enough to be ordained, you'll be in very good company.
We look at ourselves and you think, how can God use me? And yet, I believe that God does have a special purpose, and for some it is being called specifically into that very special area of ordination. It doesn't mean to say you're better than anyone else, it is just that you are fulfilling what God has called you to do. If there is that sense within, or even just a tiny whisper, you go and talk to somebody, you share it with somebody. My name's Katie Canty. I'm a Church of England prison chaplain. I work in HMP Alt Course, which is the modern prison next door to Fazakerley Hospital. The moment I stepped foot inside the prison, I just had a real sense that this was where God was calling me to be in some way. People I work with, people who, if you like, are the lowest of the low, and yet respond, and you get the sense that you are sitting where Jesus would have sat with them, and you are just having that privilege of being able to communicate with them in a very special way and bring to them the love of God. And that to me is what makes the whole thing immensely amazing and just such a privilege to be part of God's plan. But deep down there was this sense that God had something special for me to do. And it was that I found through actually going forward into, if you like, a full-time commitment of ordination, that I felt that I'd reached that place where God was indeed calling me to be. But it wasn't anything that came suddenly. It was a growing sense, a sort of growing into, because God often does speak softly, but the calling never goes away, that voice never goes away. And until you start to act out on it, you will not know really what the particular calling is. We all have a calling, whether it's to ordination or not, but it's worthwhile knowing that God takes us when we're at our weakest.
My name's Jacqueline Stover. I started doing this job within the past 12 months. Didn't really know what I was getting into, I have to say. I just knew I wanted to do whatever God wanted me to do. And I just took whatever step was the next step in the process. So that after going away and praying and thinking, the next step was to look at what a vocations conference was like and what it involved. And as a teacher, my mission statement in a way was what would I have done with my life if I hadn't met Mrs. Stover. And as a curate, my job is kind of similar. If you love people and you care about them and what they can become, it gets bigger, the picture gets bigger. One day, this sounds really weird, so be prepared. I was standing taking a funeral and all the family were there, and there was the casket at the side here, and I was saying prayers for those people, the family, and explaining to them how their loved person's life fitted into the great scheme of things, even though she didn't go to church, that she did her best with what she had, and she brought her family up to be the best that they could be. And I just had this massive sense that I was doing what I'm here to do. Just that. And it was a really strange place to have that feeling. Listen, if I can do it, anyone can do it. That's all. Just, do what you feel God's calling you to do.
Neil Short. I've been a minister now for 22 years, so that breaks down of 4 in a market town, Glossop, 6 in inner city Bradford, then 11 in an overgrown village called Burscough in West Lancashire, and for the last year, city centre Liverpool. I think it's important to just let yourself off the hook. You don't have to make a speedy decision. And my experience is that God tends to call people over a period of time. So it's best to talk to quite a lot of folks who are clergy, people who are going through the process. And if God's calling you, He won't go off you, He'll keep calling you until He's got you. Go and have a look at the people that God called. I don't find Him calling many people who look like the finished article. In fact, I don't see him really calling many people who you'd sort of say, well, he's an obvious candidate. In fact, nearly everybody he calls are people who've already ruled themselves out, or other people have ruled out. In fact, God chooses the foolish things of this world. And after all, He chose me.